Mayor, we are recording. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone, and welcome. This is the city of Cottonwood Heights. It's Tuesday, May 18th. It's 5:02 p.m., so we're just a couple minutes late, but I think we're basically on time. My name is Mayor Mike Peterson. This is our City Council work session. We're meeting via Zoom, and therefore I'm going to read a determination that authorizes to do so. And hopefully this is one of the last times I have to read this tonight, because it looks like, again, hopefully in June, we'll be back to in-person meetings. But anyway, pursuant to Utah Code annotated 524-2074, the city's mayor, as the chair of the city council, hereby determines that conducting the meetings of those bodies on this date at an anchor location present a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. It is well recognized that a global pandemic currently exists related to the COVID-19 coronavirus, which has the potential to overwhelm Utah's healthcare system. Therefore, due to the state of emergency caused by the global pandemic, I find that conducting a meeting at an anchor location under the current state of public health emergency constitutes a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the location. Therefore, again, we're meeting virtually. The first item on the agenda is the review of the business meeting agenda, which is later this evening. And I think it's important to note tonight that during citizen comments, I expect to have a lot of comments, and as per our city ordinance, we will take comments up to 1 hour. We'll allow 3 minutes per comment, and again, encourage those commenting tonight to be civil and no personal attacks, but again, welcome their comments and want to hear their concerns and questions that they would like to share with the city council. So that'll be the first item. Then we have public comment. It's regarding a rezone request. So Mike, do you want to just quickly introduce that to the council?
Sure, and I have a presentation plan that I'll give during the business meeting to save some time, but it's a request for a rezone on Fort Union Boulevard. I don't know the exact address on the top of my head, but it's just east of 2700 East on the north side, just east of Virginia Hills Drive. It's a request to amend the zoning of the property from R1-8 to residential office. The general plan land use map supports the change. However, the Planning Commission recommended denial of the change at their meeting in April. So the presentation I have that I'll go over in the business meeting will provide the commission's findings and then staff's recommendation and our findings as well.
So I understand this is in District 3, so this is in Tally's district, so I appreciate hearing Tally's perspective on that.
Can I ask one question?
Please.
Did the Planning Commission offer up any of these zoning conditions to mitigate or to look for approval?
No, in reviewing the minutes, I don't think they were concerned about any particular use. They just, the finding they gave is they thought it was spot zoning, which is not an issue legally or in any way. But that was the best finding that we could pull out of the minutes. So it wasn't concerned over specific use. Residential office doesn't allow any of the concerning high traffic or retail type uses. So the impact really is minimal. And I've got some more information I can go over in the business meeting to show if they were to rebuild the building, what the setbacks would need to be, the context of the property. It's on an island kind of, it fronts on Fort Union and has no access on any neighborhood street. And it's been used as a home occupation, at least partially a business, since the city incorporated.
I might want to at least be interested in what the zoning conditions that we have at our disposal are, but that we can do. This tonight's just a public hearing, correct?
Right, yes. We're not voting tonight, yeah.
And Mike, how did the voting fall amongst the planning commissioners?
I believe it was 5-1.
Voting no.
Correct. There were no public comments. We have not heard any concerns from the public on this item, however.
So we'll be taking public comment tonight on that rezone request. So, and we'll have Mike give us more information prior to those public comments. We do have one action item this evening. Is consideration of resolution 2021. And this is concerning our PDD process, and it's the formalization of our development review committee. So Mike, do you want to talk about that, or Shane going to do that? Yeah.
I can introduce it and Shane can jump in if needed. The DRC is the Development Review Committee, and it's a committee made up of staff. Generally the department heads of community and economic development, public works. We have other planning staff and engineering staff present at those meetings, as well as our fire inspector with Unified Fire, the city geologist, so Tim Thompson with Geostrata, when there are those types of hazards present on any development project. And then from time to time, we bring in outside expertise like Salt Lake City Public Utilities or Cottonwood Improvement District if it's a water or sewer issue. But the DRC meets broadly to discuss potential developments or pre-applications of pending development proposals. And we go through and try to provide feedback from each department on what the ordinances are and what requirements need to be met as part of the city's review process. There is a line in the sensitive lands ordinance that requires DRC, the makeup of the DRC specifically for sensitive lands applications to be approved by the council. In all other cases, it's the membership and the makeup of the DRC is appointed by my position, and it's an administrative staff function. But for sensitive lands items, per the current ordinance, that authority is given to the city council. So while the makeup of the DRC and the staff is exactly the same, and the process and the work and the level of detail we apply to development projects is the same, because the gravel pit and other kind of East Bench development projects we've been working on lately are in the sensitive lands ordinance. We need the council's formal approval to formalize the DRC.
And Mike, I understand you're the chair of that DRC then.
Correct.
Question, comments? You also can have some at the time we take action. Yeah. All right. Any comments or thoughts about the business meeting later this evening? Okay, thank you. We'll come back to the work session agenda again. And just a reminder, looking at the work session agenda, we do have an important closed meeting scheduled for tonight. So if we can get through the review of the budget by 6:30, that would be the goal, so that we can have that closed session. But if there's sufficient interest to continue the budget discussion, then we would need to come back after the business meeting to have that closed session to deal with a couple issues. So with that being said, we have basically one staff report today, and that is dealing with our 2021-2022 budget discussion. So I'll turn it over to Tim Tingey and our Finance Administrative Services Director, Scott Georges.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to talk a little bit about our process to remind everyone about what we've gone through. This budget, which at our last meeting, well, 2 weeks ago, we adopted the tentative budget. We went through all the specific line items and the narrative that Scott had prepared in his memo, and outlined all of that information. We're now in the tentative budget process, so there's obviously opportunity to provide additional input and modifications or changes. Just to reiterate, this process started in January. It started with Scott and I working through budget figures and numbers, and then we had committees that included council members on those committees, the budget committee as well as the compensation committee as well. They met multiple times and provided input through the process, which we really appreciate. And we also had department heads provide the input as well. And that brought us forward to that tentative budget adoption. Tonight, we have additional numbers and additional recommendations that we just wanted to run through real quickly. We're going to present those and then talk about the budget, the questions that you have, the issues related to the budget. Then we're also going to take a little bit of time after that discussion to move into a budget comparison analysis that we've done that was requested as part of the budget committee, as well as we talked about that in the council retreat. And then if we have time, we'll talk briefly about some modifications to our fees. We can talk about that in another time. There's not significant modifications, but just some both increases as well as reductions in some of the fees that we're proposing. So let me just talk
Tim,
real briefly.
Tim, before you proceed,
Yeah.
do you want questions from the council during your presentation, or do you just want to wait and finish? Is this more formal? Wait for you and Scott to get finished and then for us to hold our questions?
On this portion of the budget document, I just have a very quick about 4 things to mention to you.
Okay.
Then we can go into question and answer and conversations on that, if
Yeah,
that's
I'll-
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're not going to go through the memo because we went through that last time. If there's questions, and you probably do have questions on that, keep in mind that in that memo, we talk about the stormwater fee. That's something that you'll be considering as part of this budget process. We are going to have a separate public hearing on that fee, most likely at our next council meeting in June, to get public input on that. We also had the public open house, as well as we've had comments that we forwarded to you as well on that. So as far as some recommendations with some changes that we're proposing, this is coming from myself and from Scott. Let me go through those very quickly. So we did find out that the SB 136 bill, the dollars that we're going to be receiving for transportation work, the 400,000 approximately, that is going to be included in this budget year. We are going to get those funds. That's 400,000 that we're budgeting. So we have added, that will be something we're recommending as an add into this, so we can have that go towards into our general fund and then transferred into capital projects for the work for various projects in the right of way. We have updated our LTD and STD, the life insurance, long-term insurance, and short-term disability insurance. And we did get a new bid on that. So there was a reduction in about $19,000 for the cost of that, which was a good thing that we went out to bid on that. We've included $6,700 to go towards a match for the Utah State Historic Preservation Grant. That's that CLG grant that we've talked with you about before, and you have looked at, related to doing a survey of historic properties. The Historic Preservation Committee wrote that grant, and we needed to provide a match on that of $6,700. We've included $21,000 to go towards updating tasers. One of the reasons for that, and I'm recommending this, is we purchased our tasers in 2007. I was not aware that the service for those tasers has ended. And so we want to include those in the budget. It also has a component where when they are taken out, that they immediately the body camera is initiated as well. So we want to include that. And then finally, we updated the fire cost increase to match the current budget projection of $117,000. Then finally, related to this, there is $68,416 in the general fund ending balance that needs to be reallocated to adhere to the state code requirements on reserves. What we're recommending is that goes towards our capital improvement, or be transferred into our capital improvement fund to utilize for capital projects. We've also included a placeholder of $350,000 for the solar grant for City Hall. That needs to be trued up, and hopefully we'll have more information on that down the road. And then the final certified property tax rate will be added in most likely the night that you adopt the budget. We don't have those figures in yet. So those are things that we've added with those changes we're recommending. And so now we can go through, and if you have questions or issues you want to discuss with the budget from our presentation 2 weeks ago, and tonight we're happy to answer questions and go through the specifics.
I have an initial quick one. The exceeding the 25%, is that in the current budget year that we're going to need to make an adjustment, or is that strictly for next year's budget?
That's for next year's budget. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. It's next year's budget that we will need to do that.
That's accurate, yes.
And so that 68,000, our recommendation is that be placed in the capital improvement fund, and that's how we can adhere to that.
Along with that, we could potentially end the year at a rate higher than 25%, but it won't be budgeted that way. And I would think that we probably will. But that won't be an issue, because how the statute reads is you have to be under 25% from a budgeted perspective. And so we should be okay, even though we will likely end the year at a higher than 25% level.
I have a few questions that I'll throw out, but for the council, please jump in so I don't dominate the discussion. I think there's one very, very important component that we've not talked about, and that is the American Recovery Act funds that are coming to the city, which could be what?
3.77 million is what the number that we've looked at.
Right, that's 3.77 million. So think about that. And we do have some clarification that's come down from Utah Local Government Trust in just the last week that it can be used for stormwater. And I don't know if you want to, I don't want to speak too much about what it can be used for, because I'm obviously not an expert, but that's one of the issues that is on our budget discussion. And so you'll want to be aware of those funds. And my question to Scott is, once that money comes to us, does that impact our statutory requirements regarding spending?
Yeah, Mayor, let me, if it's
Yeah,
okay,
please.
let me address the
Yeah.
first part of that, and then I'll let Scott address that.
Yeah,
We have included in this budget narrative related to those funds coming. We have not included them in this budget at this point because there's still timing issues. Scott and probably myself, we are going to be attending meetings with both the state and the Utah League of Cities and Towns on the interpretation of what is allowable under that. So we're still sifting through that information. We have recognized it in the narrative. What our plan is, if the council wants to, is once we have the details on all of that, that we would come back most likely after the budget's adopted and come forward with a set of projects that we can consider as part of a budget amendment. So that's what we will do. However, what you say, the implications of it potentially for stormwater, there are definitely implications, because it's likely that you can use that for stormwater projects as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's important.
Yeah, just for the council's education and awareness, because it has an impact. And the question I have to Scott again is, once that money is received, does that impact our percentage requirements by the state?
So it wouldn't, because it would be unearned revenue at that point in time, and we'd put it in as basically an unearned revenue at that point in time in our budget. And so until the point in time comes that we can say we have a claim to that revenue, i.e. we have an expense that we can tie back to it, it isn't really become ours, because you have to have a qualifying expense under their guidelines in order to be able to truly, I'll use the term, keep the money. So they're giving us this money, but it's not ours to do whatever we want with. We have to spend it according to their plan, according to their guidelines. For instance, one of their guidelines is you can't have any expenditures prior to March 3rd of 2021. There's other guidelines that go along with it. The documentation, if I hold this up, it's quite thick. I'm going through it, but there are a lot of questions, kind of like when we had the CARES Act start. There were a lot of questions, and it seemed that about every month they would update things with more clarification as we went along. And finally, by the time we had about a month left to spend those monies, we finally got good clarification on it. I hope that the clarification comes much quicker this time. However, it does indicate that stormwater infrastructure is one of the items that these funds can be used for. There are other items where they can be used for as well. And we need to probably review all of these items in a meeting like Tim was saying, just so everybody can be aware of all the potential items that these funds can go to. But it is a lot of money that we need to consider, and there will be an ultimate limit on how long you can have to spend this money. It won't be unlimited.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that clarification. Again, the reason I bring it up is I've tried to been following it because I think it does have material effect on our budget going forward and on a lot of different fronts. And so, and I appreciate Tim bringing that back to us at some time, but the council needs to be aware of that. Scott?
I was just gonna say, yeah, another area that I believe is covered in there significantly for infrastructure would be roads. We know when we adopted our 5-year plan, that was a good plan, but it was just keeping us kind of where we were. Another consideration for it might be to accelerate that plan possibly a little bit, or do some of the things to get us a little bit further ahead. So there's certainly various potential ways we could utilize those funds.
Yeah, I don't know that you can actually use it for roads. That's one of the
Yeah.
areas they're kind of limited on capital. One of the areas that they will allow you is drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, but roads is not one of the capital areas that they've specified at this point in time.
Really, then I thought that's what I was reading in the paper, but you've got the documentation. You'll let us know.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I mean, I would like that would be the case because that would be very helpful. But so far, I haven't come across anything in my reading. Now, I'm not done, but I haven't come across anything in my reading where I've said, oh, yeah, we can use it for some things like that.
Another
Scott,
question. And again,
I got a question.
Go ahead, Tally. Go ahead.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
might have missed this, or maybe it's still coming out, Tim. But in the April 1st newsletter, Chief Russo talks about the city administration will prepare a budget proposal to fund additional implicit bias, diversity, and de-escalation training for all officers. Did I miss that in our discussions, or is it still coming out?
No,
That's in there.
last week or 2 weeks ago when we presented, that is included in the budget, and that's included in the narrative. Absolutely. That is all included in this budget.
Do you know the dollar amount off the top of your head?
I do. I have it right here. Scott might beat me to it. Just a second here.
That's $7,500.
Yep.
Is that enough to cover all the officers?
We've talked with Chief Russo about it, and we feel like that is enough to cover that. We have additional training as well that can be utilized. And Chief, you can add if there's anything on that.
No, we think that'll cover it, but certainly we won't turn down any more gifts. If you want to increase that number, we'll find good use for it.
Scott, what was the date that needed to be spent by? I thought I heard you say something, but I know it can't be right. What was the date on that as far as needing to spend that by?
You're talking about the stimulus money?
Yes.
The ARC.
I don't yet have a final date. I have a beginning date. The beginning date is March 3rd of 2021, but I don't yet, from my reading, see an end date. And I think that that's still out there. It will probably be about 2 years from the hinting around that I've got from it, but I don't yet have a final end date of when the expenditures have to be completed by.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I agree with that. We don't have the final date, but they have indicated just in some of the preliminary meetings with the Utah League of Cities and Towns that it will be longer than a year. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. And I think the federal government too is giving, because of the national concern across the nation, is there's much more flexibility than there has been in the past. So it's an opportunity for us to be to use it appropriately to take care of some of our needs. Another question I have, back to SB 136 and the 400,000 that's committed, you're saying you're putting that back in the budget? You're putting it back in capital? Is that where it's going?
So, yeah, so what we're proposing to do with that is it will come through as a revenue somewhat similar to how Class C roads revenue comes through, more along the lines of like a grant from the state. And then that revenue, so it would come through the general fund, and then we would propose to transfer that over into the capital improvements fund to be utilized there, excuse me, on various road projects and everything. And I think that as you look at the fund summary, especially in the capital projects fund, you'll see that we elevated some of the items that we're recommending to get funded this year, and that would help to cover that.
So it's going in as earmarked or not earmarked?
There are limitations what you can utilize that for. It's similar,
Right.
it's somewhat similar to Class C roads funds.
Right, but it's going in without clear, it's not a budgeted item other than it's just in the capital fund.
It is budgeted both in terms of the revenue coming into the general fund, and it's clearly outlined in terms of the revenue being transferred out of the general fund and into the capital.
So my
improvements
question, how is it going to be used?
on various road projects. There's a whole myriad of road projects. Everything in the 5-year plan that we have would be qualifying in terms of uses that could be utilized for it.
But my understanding, we've already funded the 5-year road plan before this money came in.
Well, we increased the amount of 5-year road funding beyond what we had transferred over there before. And so we really have kind of 3 components of funding that we're transferring over there. One is the 400,000 that that we're talking about here. Another item is the 600,000 that came by way of, and I can't remember the Senate bill on it, but it was from 2018 that started that, where that's actually a sales tax component that comes over, and that can be utilized for roads or for trails. And then there's about 1.2 million that we transfer over from the general fund that's more general in nature in terms of what we fund over. And so that can be utilized for a lot more variety of capital projects.
No, Scott, I'm sorry to pick at this a little bit, but you know, when we had the tentative budget and we approved it, this was not budgeted.
True.
Right. Now it's budgeted, so we've increased the budget by that amount.
We did not increase any expenditures. We put the money in the capital improvements fund.
That's my point, is that it's put in the capital improvement fund. So it's kind of in the capital improvement fund balance, but it's not been budgeted for a specific project yet.
Well, let me go over.
If so, then we've not talked about it then, because it's new tonight.
Well,
Would it offset our use of general funds from the capital project transfer? Is that
So
perhaps
Good
where?
question.
this is a section of and this didn't change from the tentative budget that we adopted. So we have 2,155,000 of projects that are public works related. 2,055,000 of those projects are street related. And then, excuse me, and then there's 100,000 for sidewalks right here. That adds up to the 2,155,000. So what we had proposed to transfer in here prior to today was 1,800,000, which was made up of the 600,000 that we started to get in July of 2019.
Right.
Plus the 1.2 million more generic general fund monies that we transfer over to cover it. So we were short, and we had outlined that we were a little short and needed to take care of that in the budget that we had.
So what's a little short?
Well, in addition, there's also a trails project in here of 61,000 to finish the Ferguson Canyon Park project. So if you add those two up, you're talking about overall expenses of and then there's a city hall solar. So there's $2,767,000 of expenses in here, and we're talking about let me flick up to here. What we're talking about adding in here would be 2,232,000, which would be the 600,000 from the current sales tax for transportation, 400,000 that is the UDOT Senate Bill 136 funds, and then the additional more generic general fund transfer of 1,200,000. And then there's a one-time transfer in of 395,000 from the CDRA fund for those projects that were in there. And then we're also projecting 350,000 for the grant that would be for the solar project here at City Hall that would directly offset those costs there. And then we have just a generic 25,000 in interest revenues in that fund. So the funds though that are our main operating funds is the 2,232,000. And so if you compare that, which that includes the 400,000 for the UDOT funding, and you compare that to 2,155,000 in public works items plus the 100,000, or that includes the public works items, then plus 61,000, it's pretty dang close. Adding those two together to that 2,232,000 that we're recommending to be transferred in.
I hear what you're saying, and it's a lot of numbers. It just seems like we had a tentative budget, and then we've now added in additional things that were not part of the tentative budget.
Well, and I think, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, it means that you're not having to transfer as much of the general fund in to cover these projects. That 400,000 off, or takes a portion of that off, so you're not transferring as much in.
Yeah, when we had presented the tentative budget, it wasn't balanced in this area, and that was one of the items that we had outlined there. And I can't find my correct one right now, but anyhow, one of the items that we were short on was we needed to solve an imbalance in the, if I can get to the right one here.
Which would have been utilizing the general fund, more general fund dollars to cover that.
I think that's what Councilman Bracken was saying, that with the 400,000 plus the CDRA funds, then that's less money you're taking from the general fund balance, and therefore that general fund balance is larger.
No, we weren't balanced when we presented. We needed additional funds from the general fund to come in here to balance this.
Okay.
That was one of the items that we had outlined when we presented the budget 2 weeks ago. So by adding and that was even utilizing the 395,000 that came from the CDRA fund. So what we basically did is we utilized this 400,000 to come in here and balance this fund, and then it leaves most of the 395,000, not all but most, to be available for other projects. It would still be unbudgeted in the capital improvements fund.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's just my concern, to be frank and not be critical, just in the way I look at things, is that it looks like it's like the CDRA funds. We have not said how we want to use, I know they're reimbursement and they're going into capital, but I don't know that we've met to determine how they should be used. Well, I don't know that we've met and determined how the additional 400,000 be used, but what you're telling me is that the decision has been made based upon the identified projects already that we had not yet funded. And this capital funds had a negative balance starting out.
I wouldn't put it that way, Mayor. I'd say that this is a recommendation from Tim and myself to you, and then you take it from here in terms of these projects that are here, and these projects that are outlined here add up to 2,155,000. If you would like to adjust those projects and reduce the expenditures to, specifically look at what might be available, to put the 400,000 to, please feel free.
No,
but these are the items that we put forward.
I understand, and I want to do everything, but I want to understand clearly what the impact is of doing it. And if the impact of doing the 2.1 million is that we need to add in additional $800,000 to this, and I just want to make sure that's clear to the council that that's what we're doing, and it's coming from this the CDRA funds, or it's coming from the 400,000 a year, which is part of Senate Bill 136. I just want to make sure that's clear. I want to do these things, and I have a question of, if we're doing this much, do we want to talk about again for Councilmember Peterson on the 17th East sidewalk? Should that be listed then again, or have we already determined that that should not be included?
I was just thinking, Mayor, that we should have itemized our priorities, since our dollar amount is now fluctuating. We have to go back and revisit those conversations.
Well, and we have, before it's finalized, I guess we'll have that opportunity.
That 17 South was a disappointment because that is a direct route for
Yeah.
the elementary school, and it seems to be pushed down quite a ways down the road. I know we have certain list of priorities, but that seems that it would be one of the higher ones.
Yeah, and I think what's on here in support of Scott and Tim, this is what we talked about in our retreat. The only thing that with a better than anticipated revenue in some of these new revenues, I think the next item would be that 17th East that I, for one, would like to see included. And then we have some further needs that may come later based upon other meetings that we still have a fund balance to do that. So anyway, that's the way I look at it. It just had some questions, and I appreciate, Scott, you taking the time to articulate that to me. Other discussion items, maybe Tim, if you take a minute and tell us.
I had
Go ahead,
one
Scott. Yeah,
that I discussed with Tim. It was still lingering on there, but there was an odd number that was in the speed, basically a traffic calming program. We've typically done $20,000 or $25,000 on that to have funding there to address concerns as they brought up. This budget, at least currently, still had it listed at close to 40. But we haven't discussed any specific projects that would be demanding that. So I was inclined to put that back at the 25,000 where we kind of historically had it. And then if we need to have an adjustment to increase that throughout the year to address a specific project, we do that. That just struck me as a little odd.
So in the past, I know we have not had speed mitigation projects. This was a new thing. The thing that we did have before is we had trip hazard.
We've had a traffic calming program budget previously.
That must
It's been
have
a couple of years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
prior to me coming, but we did add in trip hazard up above, and I can't remember the amount
Right, and we've done that as well.
now.
And again, that's me from historical. We regularly get questions of people wanting to do traffic studies and speed studies and stuff on like that. And then in the past we've done that rather than a small projects fund or something like that. We actually had a designated traffic calming fund to fund that type of a thing. I assume that this was kind of the same.
Hey, right
type of
along
money.
that same line, Scott and Scott, we paused the matching funds for sidewalk and driveway repair.
Oh, that's right, we did,
Back
didn't
when
we?
we were really tight, we were worried about COVID,
Yeah.
so maybe we revisit bringing that program back.
Well, $40,000 would do 20 in each.
Was that 50,000, I think, annually? Was it, Scott, do you remember?
I don't think it was that high.
On sidewalk, the 50/50?
Yeah,
I think
it was
Seemed like it was
50,000.
40.
Yeah, I
50.
think, yeah, I think it was
Matt
close.
said it was 50, he'd know.
Yeah,
But no,
well, I'd like to put that on the list as well, and because it was something that's valuable.
It's a good
But
program.
again, Matt, you maybe need to help us understand, with what I understand is the difficulty of being able to get concrete, and the 50/50 match is exorbitant for the resident.
Right now, concrete is a very difficult thing to get. We're having troubles on our projects as well. It's so small individual projects. It will be a difficult thing to pull off. But we haven't, last year, the council decided to forego that program. We have been telling residents as soon as it comes back, we will work with them. But that's where we are.
But if I'm hearing you right, the council, and correct me if I'm wrong, would like to include that funding back in, and then Scott, you're talking about the 25,000 rather than the close to 40,000 in the.
Yeah, that's almost half of the funding but yeah, I'm glad that Tally brought that up and reminded us that we
Yeah.
canceled that program. It's been very popular.
Yeah, it wasn't
So-
passed. The only problem is, again, you can do a 4x4 foot square and it could be $1,000
Yeah,
because they can't bring in small loads. But also in support of Councilmember Peterson on 1700 East, do you know what that cost is to do that project?
I was going to ask that question too.
I do have the cost actually, and there's differing levels of it, but to get it done, I was talking to Matt about this earlier. That's why it's on my mind. For that whole project to get it done right, it would be around 450,000 approximately.
Oh, boy. That's why we were looking for a grant.
Now,
And I believe you
Fine.
on that. The one thing that it seemed like it was lower than that because there's been some negotiation with neighbors, and maybe Matt can mention about the most recent negotiations with those people on, the individuals that live on the west side of 17th. But I think there's been some, Debbie Durchie, I know, has done quite a bit of work on that. She's the one that helped get that a little farther down on 7,200. But I'm certain we ought to revisit that and see what we can do. At 400 seems pretty high from what originally we talked to.
Yeah, it seems really high. I thought it was more like 170 or something, but yeah.
Matt, you want to address that? May I have Matt address that?
If I may, the number is high because we have to, when we're budgeting, have to assume we need the property. I have not personally had any discussions with any neighbors on dedication of property through there, so we put that in that number. We also have in that number budgeted the engineering and construction management because it is a large project. So that is in there as well. And the cost of materials is up there. So it could go up as high as 400, 425 if we have to buy property. If we don't have to buy property, we will bring it down to about 350. Depending on price materials and what we're doing. So what you are looking at budget numbers. So keep that in mind as you're reviewing this.
Hey,
Typically,
Hey,
it's in the right of way. It's the property owner maintains it. We just have right of way, or do we have to buy it because we're going to be building a sidewalk on it?
We have to purchase it, and or it has to be dedicated to the city. Because we can't go and build on the private property. We can't build that. The owners actually own out in some cases to the middle of the road. Some own up to the edge of asphalt. So it varies through there. I think it's great that the residents would dedicate the property. If they all would do that, that would be great. But all it takes is one person to say they would prefer to be paid for it. And then you have an equity issue of what you want to deal with. So we've estimated the cost of the property in that as well. So that's what you're looking at.
Matt, any way a project like that can be phased so that we can show good faith to that group who've been fighting for years to have it? Is there anything we can do as a first step, or?
The first step would be getting the first step would be getting the property tied up and whatever that process looks like. Since it hasn't been a project on the books, we have not pursued it. The only way we pursued this is through application for TAP grants and things of that nature. But we have not gone so far as to actually put funds towards it to survey what is actually needed and get legal descriptions put together and then approach individual property owners for that. I mean, if that's the direction we'd like to go, we can certainly do that. I think that's a fairly minimal cost when I say minimal, you're, $15,000 to get it all, the legal descriptions and everything put together.
So it would be nice to have some progress on that project, if there's something we can do. So maybe you could talk with Tim and Councilor Peterson and see if there's a piece of that sidewalk concern. It's been there for years, and it was close to the top of our priority when we did those grant requests. We did Bengal and Highland. Yeah.
We have pursued it that I know of 3 times, I believe,
Oh.
since I've been here.
Yeah.
Trying to do the grants. It just doesn't score as well compared to other projects.
Yeah, we understand. So now is an opportunity maybe to at least look at that if there's a phased approach, and then the council can make final determination. But
Well, we can certainly do a phased approach and do the property and also do preliminary engineering on it to try to tighten that number up a little bit more, and we can present something at a later date in the budget. If you would open the budget and want to review that, I'd leave that up to Tim and Scott on that process.
and I'll let Councilmember Peterson weigh in on that. It's his district, and I don't want to step out of bounds, but it's something we've been hearing for years.
Mayor, just real quickly.
Sure.
I think what we could do is I can meet with Debbie Durchie, the one that they dubbed her the sidewalk queen, I think, but she was able to help. She did quite a bit of work, and then it got put on the back burner. But Matt, correct me if I'm right. Didn't we have some issues on property lines and easements on the other side of the street, which would be the east side?
Yeah, there are some, and yes, there are some, it's a very unusual configuration when you look at 1700 East, especially on the east side. Why and how things were done the way they are is come and gone. It's past, it's water under the bridge. We are trying to work the west side because you still have to work with the width of the road and the right of way in there. And we have some constraints on the east side that we would need to deal with. So it does make it a tricky project, if you will, but not undoable. I mean, we can do it. There are some things we have to overcome though.
Yeah, let's revisit and see what we can do to mitigate some of that higher cost. But I appreciate looking into this again and maybe resurrecting this to the point where we can start backtracking and going back to where we were maybe a year or so ago.
Well, to get you a better number, a better budget number, when I look at these budgets, I kind of have to go worst case scenario and go from that direction. Because the last thing I want to do is come back to you later and ask for that tens of thousands of dollars more because we weren't prepared. But if we make this a certain project, we can certainly tighten it up with engineering and property, and we can do that. And I'll visit with Tim and Scott and put together an estimate on that, and they can bring that forward.
Yeah. So just for further discussion, two more questions, and I'll shut up. But one, I just want to confirm with Scott, the Ferguson Canyon Park project, that we've added sufficient funds to complete that. Because I've got on my notes, we had the 61,000, but then I said there was a plus 150, but that was just in my notes, so I can't remember what it was.
I think we did not address the grant that came in on that. I'll need to get the.
Oh, that's
details on
right.
that.
Yeah, that's
There was
right. So we had an
$150,000.
additional $150,000 grant. That's what it was. Is
Yeah,
that?
so a portion of that's in this year's budget, the 61, and we'll have to do a carry forward with a budget amendment. And then the 61,000 adds to that. Am I correct, Scott, in that?
Yeah, we've budgeted some. We thought we needed an extra 61, and then, but in terms of the grant adding to that, that would actually, if that's a direct offset to the costs that we're already incurring, then that would mean that there would be an extra 150,000 available in the capital projects fund, because that would come in as a revenue offset.
So the 150,000 would be a revenue offset. It's not needed to finish the project.
I don't know the answer to that because I'm not privy to the grant. So
Okay, yeah. So I know that that grant just came through a couple weeks ago. My last question, this is a sensitive one for some people, and that is the compensated absences that we booked at over $500,000. Can you tell me, or maybe this can be a later discussion, how that has fluctuated over the last 10, 15 years? Because it seems like it just grows. And in enterprise fund accounting that I've been involved with in the past, I understand auditors like to see that, but how much of a chance is it that you would have every single employee all leave the same year?
typically you don't have that happen. However, it does have to be accounted for from an audit standpoint in your on your books. The reason for the growth is because there's a growth in terms of how much leave you earn the longer you're with the entity. That's one of the items.
I understand, yeah.
The other item is that in a general sense, hourly wages go up each year. And so the combination of those two items factor in on both how many hours an individual has in their bank, if you will. And then if you multiply those out, that's what basically adds into the total.
No, I understand what constitutes that amount, but my question is, just having it there, is that a statutory requirement?
Well, it's an accounting
Practice?
not a practice. It's part of GASB, which is General Accounting Standards Board, the Government Accounting
Is it part of GASB? Because I know some entities don't do that. That's why. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I know that at both of my last entities, and Salt Lake County does it, but they do it within the Employee Service Reserve Fund. And so you don't always see it within the different funds of Salt Lake County, but it is held there. And so it depends on how it's looked at and presented in different funds and in terms of how that would be presented. Some funds, it's explicitly required to be expended out, and some funds it's just required to be reserved. In our fund, it's just a reserve.
Yep. Okay.
Is it not an actuarial number?
This is not an
it's not
actuarial because even if someone were to die, it would be due to them or to their surviving spouse or whoever, their surviving, person would be.
Well, luckily our budget's okay now that it's not a critical thing, but at some point in time, I just want to make sure we are using it appropriately rather than just sitting there. Yeah. Scott, I cut you off.
Mayor, may I jump in here? Christine.
Oh, welcome, Christine. Yeah.
I've been here the whole time. I've just I've been having some technical difficulties, but I guess from my perspective, I've always agreed with the mayor on this point, and unless there's a reason why we must keep 100% of that sort of in the fund, to the mayor's point, I don't know why I wouldn't even push it off another year. I think we should try to figure out if it's not mandatory, can we reduce the amount? Because unless it's Armageddon or some form or fashion, there's going to be bigger problems to go if everybody dies or leaves at the same time. It just seems completely improbable to me. And I think there are enough things that capital needs that the city has between the stormwater at 1700 East and trails and open space, roads. I mean, we have this great opportunity for a windfall, but let's try to get some things done from my perspective. And I think it seems a little bit, best practices is very different than must do. And so I guess from my perspective, I'd like to know, is it a must, or is it just we like to do it this way?
Oh, and that's my point. So we have a similar fund at Whifford. Part of that's OPEB, so it's retirement benefits. It's an actuarial number, but it seems like would be a certain amount that you could expect to be expended over a year, and you'd take some percentage of that. 100% seems excessive, but maybe the number is 25% is what's necessary.
Now, that's what I was saying. It'd be good to know what we have paid out over the last 10 years and how that's grown. Yeah. And
The
some,
one of the differences between OPEB and this compensated absence is the compensated absence that we have on the books is due to employees now. They've earned it, invested in it now. An OPEB is something that you earn over time, and that's vested into the future, and it's a projection of what that cost is going to be in the future. And so that's one of the differences why OPEB's treated a little bit differently and isn't a current impact versus a future impact of that. But we'll definitely look into it and bring some guidance in that we can share with everyone in terms of best practice versus must do.
No, and I appreciate that. And again, I recognize that the employees have earned it. It's theirs. We would always be responsible for that, but to fund it at 100%, assuming that every employee left 1 year seems to be, I don't know, it just raises some questions in my mind, just from my previous experience. I know we've taken a lot of time, but I know that Tim, and Mike, do you want to do your comparison analysis presentation as well? And I know we need to have a closed session at 6:30. So
Yeah, Mayor. So just for just to sum up what I've heard thus far, the things that we'll bring back at the next work session, because I think we have this scheduled again for a brief discussion at the next work session. We'll provide more details on potential phasing on 1700 East. We'll include funding for the sidewalk program for your consideration. Reduce the speed mitigation by roughly 15,000. A grant.
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to jump in. I'm questioning why we're reducing the speed mitigation. That's probably one of my number one requests from residents is speed mitigation. And so I strongly, vehemently that we should reduce that. So I just want to put that on the record.
So why do we have the amount we had? What that amount?
Tim, maybe you could talk about it, but how many requests have I asked for in terms of speed mitigation and speed bumps this year? I think I probably have at least 4 different requests.
Yeah, we've had several requests, and I think the funding that we included in there were from requests like that. We haven't defined which requests are going to be approved, but that's where the number came from, I think, from the retreat.
So the current budget number is 39,480. And Scott was saying to do 25. Is that what I heard?
Well, I mean, yeah, we handle the 25 that we've used in the past has been to address those issues, to do the analysis and determine where projects may or may not need to be done. If we need to do a budget adjustment because we come up with a larger project that's outside of that, or it becomes a capital project, then that's something that's fairly easily done in a capital or in a budget adjustment.
So Matt,
I'm sorry, I thought that out of our budget committee, that number was something we recommended. So I'm having deep trouble right now listening to this discussion.
I brought it up in those meetings.
Are the three main pillars of our community: health, safety, and welfare. And for us to nibble over $15,000 or $20,000 when we're talking about roads and other things, I find that to be a pound. What is it? Pound short, whatever the saying is. I'm shocked we're having a discussion over $15,000 over safety.
but again, when it's budgeted, it means it still would only be spent as needed. So I don't think it's a material amount. I agree. And if this has come out of the budget process,
I brought it up there as well, Mayor. I brought it up 2 weeks ago.
Do you oppose?
I still feel the same way.
That
if we have a capital project that comes from those funds, then I think that we address it on a case by case basis.
I'll be happy to forward you every single email and let them have a private meeting with them. This is in my newsletter. I even spoke of this. This is the most important issue for my residents. is speed mitigation and safety, and having kids be able to walk and ride their bikes around the neighborhood without having to fear for their lives. And I'm shocked. You know, some people on this council want a $3 million or $5 million public works building, and we can't even figure out how to find $15,000 for a speed bump.
Well, I guess you're going on the assumption that a speed bump is the grand all be all 100% panacea for that solution, and it's not. So let's be frank.
Okay, now, so what we have is a point here where Tim is looking at what things to bring forward. And so the question's been raised on the speed mitigation piece of it. I personally don't have a problem with $39,000. It's still going to be based upon following the traffic mitigation policies and proposals. So I don't personally have a problem with it, but I'd love to hear from Councilmember Bruce and Councilmember Peterson real quickly, if you have a position.
Mayor, what I've actually done in my district for some of the neighbors that, and I know it's not an end-all situation, I've actually, out of my own pocket, made up some signs that say, you know, drive like your kids live here, because there are some streets where people cut through, and we know that the limitations of speed bumps, we know some of those as far as snow removal and different things. We've had to recently, we got one of our signs repaired on Creek Road that was out of service, which actually helps and tells people the speed they're driving. And some of those things do help. I know that if we have an opportunity to try to slow some of these residential streets so that we do feel safe on them, and a lot of times it's a spectrum of people that don't realize how fast they're driving or they get carried away. But everything we can do, I think, to try to slow some of these people down, because they just don't think that clearly, especially if they're texting or other things like this. So we're trying to do everything we can. At least in my district, I think we need to look at the
No
citywide
question.
situation.
And I've been through some major speed mitigation issues in District 3 when I was a council member. I'm trying to find out if we want to debate over the 15,000. I don't have a problem putting it in. It'll still go through a process. But Doug, are you saying you're okay with the 39, or you'd like to cut it to 25?
Well, I think if we can go higher, if we go over what we think would work best in each individual situation. Each neighborhood has different issues, you know, that we're dealing with.
I think that's fundamental with our traffic calming manuals, to go through a process. Yeah.
I have to tell you, having just gotten back from Kenya, they have speed bumps on the highways, and they're effective. They're very effective. But I agree with Doug. I think we should go case by case and make sure we're doing the optimal. Yeah. But Christine makes a really good point that health, safety, and welfare is what we've sworn to provide.
It is, and I'm not suggesting we, deviate from that. It's just case by case would be, okay, this one deserves X, and there's a budget adjustment for the capital project to take care of it.
It sounds like we need to look at these numbers and see if they're tied to an analysis or if they were arbitrary.
So,
mine was based on, it was historical. We typically did the 25,000 a year, and that was usually enough to handle the requests. Was enough to do the speed signs, which tend to be the most efficacious type of traffic calming, but it wasn't enough to handle larger capital type project.
Yeah. So I understand what Scott is saying. Tally, you taking a position regarding this amount that's in the budget. Do we want to bring it back and re-look at it, or leave it at the 39? I think I heard both Councilor Peterson and Councilor Bruce saying that the higher amount was palatable to them.
That's correct.
Yes, let's look at what we get for a certain amount, then we can adjust that. I think there will and should be room in the budget for safety. I mean, that's a big priority to everyone.
39 is not a lot when you start looking at doing some of that stuff. So I think we may have additional adjustments later, but what I'm hearing is that we'll leave it in at the 39,000, and again, as issues come up, we'll consider budget adjustments, but and that there will be a process through Matt and Tim and others looking at traffic calming measures. Tim, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's, and then the other two things we'll evaluate what we just talked about with the looking at the grant for the Ferguson Trail. We just received that grant,
150,000.
150,000, and then also the employee issue as far as what we're funding as far as their payout.
That's just a discussion. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So anyway, if it's okay, if we're ready, can we move into the analysis portion? And we'll be very brief on this. We did.
Well, Tim, one last thing that I hopefully you can bring back, and that is as you get more information on the American Recovery Act, that would be good to have as well, because that's
Yeah.
going to be a material impact on our budget.
Yeah, what I'm hoping is that in the next couple of weeks of the council communications as well, that we'll have more detail that I'll be able to detail out for you in writing. But like I say, we're going to be in some of the meetings on those just to really understand it more over the next week or so.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so a year ago, roughly a year ago, we did an analysis of comparisons of other cities and population with our services in each department. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott. He has gone back through and done a lot of work. I've been a little bit involved as well on evaluating this, and he'll present that right now.
Okay, so this is the study that has been updated. It is based on the 2020-2021 budget. That's the last year that we have complete budget availability from all the cities, because most cities either haven't published their budget yet or are just barely starting to publish their tentative budget at this point in time. So these items are in here. I put Cottonwood Heights at the top with population, and then all the other cities are in alphabetical order. It does omit any townships, and I have omitted Bluffdale City because Bluffdale City is very small in terms of population. So those are not included in here, and any unincorporated areas are also not included in here. You can see that the combined tax rate, and this tax rate would include fire, police, and city for the general fund property tax. What this does is it takes divisions that are defined by the cities. So how we define community and economic development might be slightly different than, say, how West Valley defines community and economic development. Some cities have multiple funds where they track different things in and may have revenues coming directly into those funds and then paying for expenses in those funds. And so some cities are very complicated. Some cities are more, I'll use the term simple, where they use fewer funds. And it's across the board in many different ways. For example, West Valley City has about 22 or 24 funds. And so as you start looking at everything, it can get very complicated. You can also see, and we'll stick with community and economic development, the average amongst all cities is 5485. But if you look at the high and the low, which is outlined right down here, it goes between $16.41 and $151.40. So obviously there's a large amount of fluctuation between the various cities in terms of what they're defining as community and economic development, and also assumptions that I've made in terms of grouping them so that we can have some comparisons. For Cottonwood Heights, we spend about $28.65 per population, per individual population on community and economic development in the course of a year. The average is $54.85. So we're a little, roughly half of the average. Is that good or bad? Well, it's hard to say. There's a lot of fluctuation in this particular line item in terms of the cost. And so it's very difficult to say exactly where we are. But based on what I'm seeing, I would say we're probably in a good position in that particular area. And so as you're looking at this, again, all of these costs down here are divided by population numbers. So when you're looking at this, if you were to divide by the number of households, or if you're divide by the number of businesses or some other denominator, you could get a little bit different story out of what these numbers are saying. So keep that in mind. As you go to HR and recorder, some cities like Holiday, they have that included in a different area of their budget. So as you look through here and add up, the average is 1277. However, with cities with cost, the average is 1348. We sit at $11.74. Some cities are as low as $2.95, but I would submit that probably in those cities with lower costs, there could be HR and or recorder costs that reside in other areas of their budget. Just because I don't have full visibility to how they're budgeting, I can't necessarily say that without going and doing a sit-down interview with their staff to figure out what's going on. Looks like West Valley was the only one that had elections. So those are some of the things as we go through this. I'm going to switch down a little bit, focus on some of the areas that have a little bit more interest. But if you want to stop and look at anything, please let me know. Justice courts, the average is $15.54 for the cost of justice courts. In our city, we're paying about $12.41. You can see that the range is from $1.27 up to $31.20. So that's quite a range, and I'm not sure exactly what Riverton's doing to do it as cheap as they're doing it. They could potentially be netting revenues against that number, but again, without the full visibility of their budget, I can't really tell what they're doing in that. For the attorney, the average is actually $20.71, and that's because in some cities, it's not specifically outlined attorney costs in separate. So 1860 would be too low of a cost. It would be $20.71. The range goes from $4.95 to $35.52. Our being at $6.50, we're pretty low in that average there. For finance and treasurer, again, some cities are obviously putting these in different areas. Riverton doesn't have any in that area, neither does South Salt Lake, Taylorsville, and West Jordan. So they're obviously counting them somewhere else, possibly in administration. But as you look at that, the average here is $21.96, and the range goes from 79 cents up to $41.82, with us having $12.04 as our cost of that. For IT, you've got some cities that have it, about half, and the others have it in some other area. It could be in their administrative budget. For us, or for the average for all cities is $17.29. We hit at $18.87. And I'll just note, for instance, for us, we purchase all the computers for the whole city in IT. And so our costs are a little higher, whereas in some cities, those costs might reside out in a division rather than being contained in an individual IT budget. Let's see. For fire, all cities have fire, so $138.51 is the average. The range goes from $86 up to $300, and ours comes in at $117.67. We're a little lower than some of our immediate neighbors right here. However, we've talked about this in the past. Some of that's due to the fact that we have a second fire station that impacts us with some costs up on the Wasatch area, and that also services the canyons. That does make our costs slightly higher than some other cities that do not have a second fire station in them. For public services, public works, the average is $89.08. The range goes from $19 up to $232. We fall in at $83. We're below the average. Our public works area contains all costs outside of project type costs and everything. And it also includes our engineering, where some break out their engineering costs separately. And sometimes the engineering cost is both public works engineering and community and economic development plan review and other engineering costs, but it's not always apparent how those divisions go. For police, the average is $230.35 for all cities. The low goes from $129 up to $404. We come in at $179.49. We're very similar to some of our neighbors that are right around us, and slightly higher on a couple line item or a couple neighbors, and lower compared to many other neighbors, such as Murray, right there. Code enforcement sometimes is included in police and sometimes is not. It is not for us and a handful of other cities, but sometimes it, like I say, it is, and sometimes it isn't. Going down, some cities have large non-departmental costs. Salt Lake City is one of them, has a very, very large non-departmental costs. I don't know what's in that because that's what they call it, is non-departmental. West Valley City is another city that has large non-departmental costs that I don't have clear understanding of what's included in those costs. Some cities separate out parks and recreation, and our parks and recreation costs are included in our public works costs, and then also some in the district's costs in the recreation district. Moving down to the next row, you can see the full general fund budget in this first column. And now the general fund, when you compare it to, like, say, Harriman, it's a little bit off because they have a police portion in a district, and they also have a fire district that they belong to. So in order to get a real apples to apples comparison, you need to go to this final column that includes general fund, police district, and fire district. The average here for all general funds plus those districts mentioned above is $827.87. The range goes from $477 up to $1,624, with us coming in at $629. If you compare that to some of our neighbors, let's see, we've got Holiday right here at 546. We've got Midvale at 718. We've got Murray at 997. And those are just a handful of our neighbor comparatives that we have. And so it's not drastically different from the comparison that we did last year in terms of our ranking. We have not drastically changed our budget from last year. There were a few situations. Harriman separated their police out into a police district where they had included that in their general fund the prior year. Some of those kinds of things, but I think this report is ready to go, and it has a series of assumptions that are outlined below, and we will send this out to you shortly, possibly tomorrow, and then you can have this so that you can review through it, and if you have any questions. But if you have any questions, I can review those questions with you tonight if you have some that I can answer.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate, I know that's a lot of work, and being someone who's did direct cost budgeting for several years in some major departments, I know the challenge of that. So appreciate that presentation. We have about 5 or 10 minutes. Any immediate questions? And of course, this is something we can bring back later as well.
No, I would just echo that. Thank you, Scott, for your hard work. And I think that's really interesting and beneficial. And I look forward to staring at it some more. I would just add for the record that I've been asking since my first month on council for a scoop it up price, all in cost, if you will, on departments that we could potentially, or we do already outsource, like justice court or public works, police, our in-house attorney. Just for the highest level of transparency, I personally have felt like it's fair to give us an outsourcing price, even if we would never in a million years consider it. I think it's the highest level of transparency. And just for the record, I'm the only one that feels this way. So city and council have chosen not
Sally,
to have that level
sorry.
of transparency.
Council member Michael or Bruce, I don't agree with that. I even asked you if you wanted to be on the committee for budget to get the detail that you wanted to. So I find that a little offensive that you'd say you're the only one that wants transparency.
Okay, I was under the impression I'm the only
one.
one that's wanted that.
No, and not to get into a debate, I think when we met in our retreat, I think there was an agreement that we would do an analysis of every department compared to like municipalities, because I think it's important to look at efficiencies, and even though they're not always apples to apples, it gives us a good idea and a barometer to look at. The only thing I think that where there was a question was how do you include the idea of outsourcing? I think that's where there is the debate, because to get a true outsourcing cost in comparison, you almost have to go out to bids with private sector and a whole variety of things. And I just felt that in our retreat that was not beneficial, but I think this is very beneficial. I again applaud Scott in putting this together, and for the council of supporting this concept of doing this comparative analysis. I think that's helpful. I know that when we worked with our fire chief, looking at what our fire costs were and realizing even though we have the same population as Holiday, their costs are cheaper or less. Cheaper is not the right word, less, but there are mitigating impacts on that budget, which we can identify when we see the numbers, and there may be others in here. So again, like Councilor Bruce said, this is something I'd like to digest further, but I appreciate having it. So
No, it's fantastic. Thank you, Scott and Tim, for your time and energy.
Okay, further questions, comments?
Scott, I just want to thank you. Each one of us, and I hope Tally agrees with this, want to be the most efficient city we can. We want to have the best police force that will protect us and serve us. We want to have our roads taken care of and plowed. I have seen nothing but efficiency, and I don't know that I care for the illusion that maybe that we're trying to overspend. I think that is none of our goal. And if we can find efficient ways to get the same kind of service, I'm 100% behind that. But I also don't like being lumped into a spendthrift type of council that feels that we need to overlook any efficiency. And that's all I have to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Peterson.
I would echo. I thank you, Tim and Scott, for preparing this. This is very interesting. It'll also be very, very interesting to look at it next year when we get new census numbers and to see, I mean, as it's based on population, that could change some of these factors, but it has been very instructive for the last couple of years.
All right, with that being said, again, Tim, maybe you could just quickly tell us the next steps within the budget process. I know one of those is taking public comment on stormwater fees. We didn't talk about that much tonight. There's still gonna be a lot of discussion on that. What else is coming up?
Yeah, so we will forward you the different fee changes that we're proposing. You can look at that. We at our next work session, we'll talk briefly about the budget and do any final comments. Then we're going to have a public hearing again on June 15th, and that will be the night that you will need to adopt the budget. So that's kind of the rest of our project or process. There's also opportunity for people to provide public comment, written comment as well, anytime before that adoption night, which is on June 15th. That's all I have.
All right, it's 6:25. We have an important closed meeting on the agenda to discuss litigation, property acquisition, and/or the character and professional competency or physical and mental health of an individual. So one of those items will be on that closed session, or more than one of them, I guess. So I'd entertain a motion to close this meeting and move into the closed session.
I move that we close the work session and open a closed meeting for the discussion of the items the mayor has stated.
It's been moved by Councilmember Bracken. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Mayor.
It's moved by Councilmember Bracken, second by Councilmember Peterson. I'll call for a vote. Councilmember Michael,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. We will now adjourn to the closed session. Do we have invites to do that?
Yeah, there should be one on there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. See you at the closed session.